So it is April 23rd, 2018. And I want to welcome you to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people. We look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, and simulcast and rebroadcast on the Gwe. That's CKWE in Tandanega. You can find our audio streaming 24/7, but certainly streaming live when we are live at www.ltnradionet.com. And, of course, we are Facebook Live. I am John Kane. I'm the show's host and producer, and I want to thank you for joining me. I've got something I want to talk about today, a little different. My friend is Tony Farina, who he's an old TV guy. He's an old reporter. He's been doing a lot of stuff, but he also writes for the Niagara Falls Reporter. I'm not a big fan of the paper, but Tony Farina is a friend of mine, and he wrote an article this week, and in fact, it was called "Gaming Stalemate That Threatens to Deal Niagara Falls a Knockout Punch." And, you know, it was an article that stimulated some conversation. I don't agree with everything that Tony wrote, and I did. I had some comments about some of what he had written, and you know, and in fact, I'll read some of what. Let me read some of the column. I guess I'll read the column that he wrote, and this is from, again, my buddy Tony Frein. He says, Governor Andrew Cuomo may be focused on his re-election bid these days, but what he is doing about the latest stalemate with the Seneca Nation. But what is he doing about the latest stalemate with the Seneca Nation over gaming revenue sharing? There's not much evidence he is doing anything. And the city of Niagara Falls, along with Buffalo and Salamanca, the three host cities, and I'm not even crazy about calling them host cities, but the three host cities for the Seneca casinos, are reeling from the loss of the slot revenue from more than a year ago. The reason I don't call them host cities is these casinos that the Senecas operate are on their land. They aren't. They are no longer parts of the city if they ever were. So whether you're talking about the land in Buffalo or the land in Salamanca or the land in Niagara Falls, it's Seneca land. The cities around them. So I just think sometimes these things need to be cleared up. They are the municipalities that are engaged with the Seneca casinos, and I don't doubt that. And and I just don't know that you can literally say that the city is hosting these things. I think that's, and I know it's a common expression. I'm not criticizing Tony Farina for using it. All right, let me go on. The Seneca stopped paying the state about $110 million per year. Now, even that number, that's averaged over the 14 years. Some of those years, it was almost $200 million. I mean, in the beginning, it was 18%, and then it was 22%, and then it was 25%. In the last, coming up in the last 3-4 years of this thing, it was a lot of money. Although, they started losing market share, but we'll get into that. Some of which was shared with the host communities again. When the Seneca tribal leaders discovered that a close reading of the 2002 gaming compact did not spell out payments of slot revenue to the state after the 14th year of the agreement, that's what. Okay, so they discovered after the 14th year of the agreement. Too bad the state didn't read it, if that's what it really says. Well, okay, well, we'll get into that. To say the state was blindsided would be an understatement. The state insists the Senecas are still obligated to pay in exchange for their exclusivities. For the exclusivity meaning the ones that the state was supposed to provide. But the Senecas don't agree. The Senecas have always felt the state never honored the exclusivity agreement by opening other gaming facilities, and with nothing in writing about paying beyond 2016, they stopped. It seems inconceivable the state didn't read the compact after the latest dispute, but apparently the Cuomo administration fell short of on its due diligence, and now there's hell to pay. I could go on, but let me kind of get to what my comment on this thing, because I address some of the clear the clear disagreements that I have with Tony's article. And this is what I wrote. The Senecas didn't discover the compact had no payments beyond 14 years. They negotiated those terms. The state wasn't blindsided. They played dumb on purpose. They knew the language was in there or wasn't in there. And so did Niagara Falls officials. The state knew the Senecas would never extend revenue sharing for the renewal period with the state, with the state flooding the gaming market. That's why they never raised the issue for the renewal. They hoped, rather, that they could win a PR war and pressure the Senecas into paying. The Buffalo News went so far as to say the Senecas have an ethical obligation to pay, even if the compact says otherwise. I mean, that's kind of the point. Deister blew all of the money he got from the Senecas and has also blown any real chance of being respectful, gracious for what he's received, or humble enough to sit down with anyone not named Cuomo. The Seneca casinos aren't tax-free enterprises in the sense that most people think. They are the funding mechanism for the Seneca Nation. All proceeds go to the government, not the state, county, municipal, but to the Seneca Nation government. Perhaps the state should have tried creating revenue from outside the state instead of sucking gaming revenue out of its own people, just like another backhanded state tax. So that was my comment, and and I shared this on my wall, a couple of my group pages, and on a page in Niagara Falls, and obviously it was met with some pretty good comments and a pretty good discussion. But here's where I wanted to spend some time talking today, because there is this sense that there are people in Niagara Falls who think the Senecas just owe the city. And they think it for a variety of reasons, most of which are false. So I want to clear some of that up. I've had some people say, well, the Senecas got the convention center for nothing. Well, that's not true. The convention center that was refurbished to the tune of $140 million or $300 million or whatever it was. I know it was a lot of money. To turn it into a usable venue for a casino was in rough shape. It was costing the city millions of dollars a year. The city of Niagara Falls had to pay just to keep it from falling into further disrepair. That's just what they were paying. It wasn't making money for the city. It wasn't making any tax revenue for the city. And in fact, by some estimates, it was going to cost between $20 and $40 million for the convention center just really to be usable, to the extent that it had been in its best heyday. So the Senecas took a white elephant off of the city of Niagara Falls' hands, and they paid for it. And in fact, over the 14 years of revenue sharing, and I'll explain where the revenue sharing comes from, the city of Niagara Falls themselves got $250 million. $249 million is what the Niagara Falls got out of the revenue sharing with the state. That's not any small number. Now, the state got $1.5 billion. $1.5 billion. $1 billion of it that they kept. So $1 billion of Seneca gaming revenue left Western New York altogether. So part of the whole thing is anybody, whether it's Niagara Falls, Buffalo, Salamanca, or anybody in Western New York, if you think the Seneca Nation should continue out of some ethical obligation to pay the state this gaming revenue, what you're really saying is let the Seneca Nation continue to send $1 billion over that 14 year, but $100 million out of the region, and only 25% will come back. And actually, it's like I said, that number is probably higher. The number probably was 120, 150, and again, before the state started screwing up the gaming market, it was closer to $200 million. So if you're Paul Deister or Byron Brown or Smitty, Mike Smith, and you're hoping the state prevails in their claim that the Senecas owe the money, what you're saying is you want money to continue to exit Western New York, so a little bit can trickle back to help you. I mean, that's not thinking in the big picture, folks. But This where many people in Niagara Falls in particular, they think that the Senecas just owe the state and Niagara Falls for the privilege of doing gaming. And you know what? That's simply wrong. Here's what revenue sharing has to be based on according to federal law, not according to treaties, not according to not according to anything but the federal law that to me binds New York State far more than it binds the Seneca Nation. The state cannot tax a native gaming venue. And you know what? The state also can't be a partner with a native gaming venue. They can't be an investor. They can't say, well, we're going to give you a convention center and we want 25% forever for that. That's our investment. No, it doesn't work that way. The state can't be an investor in a gaming facility. They can license them if their constitution allows them to, which the state wasn't able to do that until 2009, I think it was. No, 2013. 2013 is when they had their referendum go through. So, again, back this thing up. There are people in Niagara Falls who think because the Seneca gaming facility is there, that they automatically have an obligation to pay Niagara Falls. Now, again, people throw this services thing at them. Wow, they need to pay for water and they need to pay for electric. Oh, come on. Of course the Seneca Nation pays, or the Seneca gaming facility pays for their water and their sewage and for their electric. But then the question goes up, well, they don't pay for they don't pitch into the police department or the fire department. You know what? The Seneca Nation has said repeatedly, especially once this revenue sharing ended, let's work out, let's sit down and we'll talk about any kind of service agreement we need to make. You guys, we have no intention on costing the city of Niagara Falls. So if you want to work out an agreement on how fire calls get reimbursed or how police calls get reimbursed or how EMTs get reimbursed, then let's talk about it. But that's not what you're hearing from some of these rank and file, especially the ones far on the right who want to hate on Deister and Cuomo simply because they're Democrats and these voices are Trump loving Republicans. So I mean, and I'm not saying there aren't some Democrats who are really frustrated with Paul Deister. There certainly are plenty, but they have this false sense that the Senecas owe them money, and again, here's the legal, the federal requirements on what revenue sharing has to be. This is the federal policy. In order for a state to engage a native gaming venue, and this is across the country. This isn't New York State. This is the whole country. In order for a state to engage a native gaming facility, Class 3 gaming facility, in a revenue sharing provision, the state has to concede something of substantial value that is quantifiable. And it means an ongoing. If you're going to get revenue every year, then what you have to concede has to be something that is, when they say substantial, they mean equal to what you're receiving. Now let's think about this. The state has to provide something of value. So normally, and again, this exclusivity idea, that's normally what states do. Like Connecticut, what the Connecticut offered to the Pequots and the Mohicans, they said, we won't compete against you. And we won't let anybody else compete against you. So we're going to give you a statewide exclusivity. And for that, you're going to pay us a percentage of your slot machines. That's not what New York State did. New York State said, well, we're going to give you a portion of the state that we won't do gaming. And then the state turned around and did gaming. Now, the state, I mean, and this is the crazy part. We'll get into, all those who say, well, the state blew it. They made a mistake. They didn't see it. Like Tony Farina saying the state somehow was thunderstruck or something like that, or they got bowled over by this thing. No, they didn't, and I'll explain that as we go forward. The state used wording in the revenue sharing that suggested that they could breach the exclusivity, and if they did breach, the Senecas could withhold payment. that was their their cause of action, right? And then they can go to arbitration. But they also suggested, well, if we breach it with with some other electronic gaming like Quick Draw or some other kind of gaming device, that would only be a Class 2 gaming. You just don't have to pay us on Class 2. You know what? The Seneca Nation wasn't paying you for their Class 2 gaming machines anyway. They're only paying you a percentage of their slot machines, their Class 3 slot machines. But then what the state did is they went into the business of putting machines that could be qualified as Class 2, but clearly played exactly like a slot machine. In fact, the state called them slot machines. But then they said, oh, yeah, we're calling them slot machines, but they're really VLTs, video lottery terminals. To the unsuspecting gambler who walks into a state facility that has VLTs as opposed to slot machines, they don't know any difference. You put money in it, and you get a receipt out that you can cash in. I mean, that's a slot machine. But the state says, well, no, the way they're banked and the way they're networked is a little bit different. They look and play like slot machines, so much so that the state actually called them slot machines. In fact, the state was calling. See, the state couldn't do casinos. They until 2013 they hadn't passed a referendum legalizing casinos. But what they did is they massaged the laws, and they said, well, we can't really build a casino with Class 3 slot machines and gaming tables or table games, but we could build a room at the racetracks that are already gaming facilities, not standalone casinos, but they're already gaming facilities because they're racetracks where there's wagering and betting going on. And we could expand those and put a whole bunch of these machines that look, feel, smell, taste, sound, act, pay out just like slot machines. And we'll call them casinos, even though technically we know we can't legally do casinos. And they did them right within the exclusivity zone. See, the state says, well, we're going to give you a portion of state, and it's going to be the 15 counties, western counties of New York, from the other side of Rochester, from here to the western borders of New York State, and we won't compete against you, and we won't allow somebody else to compete against you. And then the state turned around and competed against them. So even if, and this I think is something that people need to understand, even if the state could legally breach a portion of that exclusivity without stopping the payment, even if they could make that argument, here's the problem. The problem is the federal requirement. See, the federal requirement says the state has to give something substantial and quantifiable as a concession for revenue sharing. Otherwise, it's a tax. And the states can't tax Indian gaming, native gaming. They can't do it. It's against federal law. The states are prohibited by the federal government from taxing native gaming. Or, like I said, or being, the shareholders of a native gaming facility to the tune of 25%. No. So all of you guys in Niagara Falls who are saying that the Senecas owe because they're allowed to have gaming, I'm sorry, you're just wrong. The only revenue sharing, and here's the other thing, a compact does not require a revenue sharing provision. In fact, the state had to come, or the federal government had to come back and explain the limitations on what revenue sharing could be to protect native gaming from being abused by states. The gaming compact is about regulation. It's about what games will operate, how the reporting is gonna go. What the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act did, it empowered the states to have some role in the regulation and the regulatory, not the ownership or the authority over native gaming, but have some role in the participation of the regulation of native gaming. I'm not crazy about that idea, but that's what the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act did. It didn't give the states the ability to control control native gaming, and of course, there's a certain irony in a place like New York that couldn't do gaming, but could compact and try to assert authority over something that they can't do themselves. But that's a whole nother issue. But to the folks in Niagara Falls, look, there's no other way to explain it. You don't understand what the revenue sharing was about. The revenue sharing wasn't about paying Niagara Falls. It was about paying the state. I will say that when the Senecas first tried to negotiate what revenue sharing was about, they suggested that they would like to help Western New York. And the state says, you don't worry about that. You send us the money, we'll send money back out to Western New York. So the money that comes to Niagara Falls, Buffalo, and Salamanca came from the revenue sharing did not come from the Seneca Nation to Niagara Falls. It came from the state. And so when people say, well, and now the state is being screwed. Well, let's be clear here. For 14 years, the Senecas paid for an exclusivity that diminished in value. And see, this is important. It diminished in value because the state started grabbing market share with the racetrack casinos, and in fact, was on track to legalize full-scale, Vegas style, as they call it, Class 3 gaming. And one of the plans was to put one on the edge of the exclusivity zone, knowing that the market share that casino would need, and I'm talking about Del Lago now, the one on the other side of Rochester, that casino's intent would be to take market share from both the Oneida casinos on the other side of Syracuse and the Seneca casinos out here in Western New York. They weren't building a new market. There's no new market to build in the middle of central New York near Rochester. Otherwise, you're only trying to tap into the existing gaming market that essentially was being serviced by the Oneidas and the Senecas. But I want to go back because when I talk about this notion that even if the state could breach the exclusivity provision, you have to understand that there's something that hasn't been talked about, which is then what became of the value of the exclusivity. And keep in mind, in order for revenue sharing not to be regarded as a tax, and in order for it to be legal as far as the federal government is concerned, the concession by the state had to be substantial and quantifiable. By substantial, it means that it had to be somewhat on par with what they were receiving. And you had to be able to determine what its value was. When I say quantifiable, you have to be able to look at what that exclusivity deal was and say, yeah, it was worth $1.5 billion. And it wasn't. It wasn't. In fact, the Senecas have lost $100 million worth of market share. Some of it's not to the state, some of it's out of state, but that's what they've lost during this exclusivity provision, the term of this provision. They lost $100 million worth of market share. So clearly, the exclusivity deal was not worth the 100 plus, the almost $200 million in some of those years that they were paying the state. And this thing was looked at quite closely in the dispute that existed between 2009 and 2013. And for those of you who weren't paying attention, who weren't playing along, in 2009 is when the Seneca Nation stopped paying the state. And they stopped paying the state and they said, look, you're breaching the exclusivity. You've got these you're even calling them casinos. You're calling your electronic game, you're calling them slot machines. So even if you're claiming they're Class 2 machines, you are clearly taking market share from our slot machines. And so they suspended payment and then began the arbitration provision to sort this thing out. So from 2009 to 2013, the Seneca Nation had held back $600 million from the state in terms of that. And it wasn't, when I say held back, it was put in an escrow account because that's the way it was laid out in the compact. The Senecas actually followed the compact to the letter in terms of how to deal with this dispute resolution clause associated with, especially with the revenue sharing. But it took a while to get through the arbitration. And you know what? They didn't get through the arbitration because Andrew Cuomo was facing the possibility, or he was staring down a referendum on gaming. In order for the Constitution of the state of New York to change so they could have Class 3 gaming, they had to pass it through 2 successive state legislatures and then and then it would have to go to a public referendum. And they passed it through two state successive legislatures. And as it was getting ready to go to a public referendum, this dispute was still raging on between the Seneca Nation and the state of New York. So the state wanted to settle it. And the state, Andrew Cuomo, said to Barry Snyder, what do you want? And so, Barry Snyder, who was the president at the time, president of Seneca Nation at the time, said, we want to keep $200 million of that $600 million. I don't know why that number, but we want to keep $200 million of it. So a third of what was being put in escrow, the Seneca Nation said, you need to surrender that $200 million to us because of the breach. And you know what? Cuomo said, yeah, sure, I'll go ahead. Now, keep in mind, and I want this to be clear, even though the state gave up $200 million, Niagara Falls, Buffalo, and Salamanca got their full share. And during that dispute, the Seneca Nation said every step along the way, look, we will pay Niagara Falls, Buffalo, and Salamanca. So they aren't hurt by this because this is the state problem. This is the state's breach, not Niagara Falls, Buffalo, and Salamanca. And the state said no. And how did they say no? Because, look, what the Seneca Nation says, if we continue to pay Niagara Falls, Buffalo, and Salamanca, when we do resolve this conflict, which they fully intended they would resolve it, we want to make sure that the money that we paid Niagara Falls, Buffalo, and Salamanca, that we're credited it towards the revenue sharing. And the state said, no, you don't pay those communities. We do. So they didn't get paid. They didn't get paid from 2009 to 2013. And then when they did, Paul Deister got a big fat check. I think it was almost $90 million he got out of that $600 million. All right. And even though the Senecas got $200 million, they didn't change the percentage. They continued to pay at 25%. And why? I'll tell you why. Because it was coming to an end in 3 years. So the Senecas just said, okay, we'll play nice. We'll keep paying. This thing ends in 2016. And that's where I'll stop for now, because this is where it gets a little dicey. And this is where people, insist that somehow this was just a major oversight by, a failure in legal counsel from on the state side. And I beg to differ. And so we'll explain that when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. And I'll go through it a little bit more when we come back. Thanks.
Your children in the classroom, English history. What do they teach about the Indians? You took us prisoner in your fight to be free. Telling me your little white lie.
Thanks for coming back. Um, Look, before I get back into it, let me go ahead and thank some of my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, Legacy 420 in Tandanega. And I want to thank individuals who help out. I've got friends like Ed Schindler who, from time to time pitch in and help me do what I do. And that's not just doing this show. I do a show in New York, so I travel to New York City each week, take a train to New York. On Wednesday, stay in a hotel, do my radio show in New York, and then I come take a train back. 2 days of travel to do a 2-hour show in New York City. But you know what? It's one of the largest media markets in the world. So it's great to get people like Ed Schindler, my friend Cynthia Trice, and and even Roger Jock, a friend of mine from Akwesasne, contributing to helping me do what I do. Friends like Neville Spring helping. Look, I couldn't do much of the work that I do without this, and because this is what I do. I mean, I'm an advocate. I'm an activist, and doing these radio shows and trying to be an advocate, not just. And again, I don't want to make it sound like I'm in the pocket of the Seneca Nation or the Seneca Party, and I'm certainly not. My problem isn't so much advocating for the Seneca Nation, but it's resisting the state. And some of what those little white lies that that Murray and Pappy John's band were just singing about that the state's involved in. So I need to be clear. But even though I want to thank those people who continue to support what I do, I still and I say this each week and I got to say it again. I really am grateful to the ones who have helped, and there have been sponsors and advertisers and donors who have helped me, especially when I was on commercial radio. Because that was very expensive. I was spending almost $30,000 a year buying airtime on one of the big stations in Buffalo. Since then, we built a studio, and I don't have to pay for my airtime in New York, but I have to pay for my travel to get there. But I wouldn't have been able to do this. We're just about into our 8th year right now, and I wouldn't be able to do this if I didn't have the support back then, and I wouldn't be able to continue to do it right now if I didn't have the support I still have. So I want to thank all of you, past and present, for helping me do what I do. And of course, it's not just this. I write, I not only am I active on social media, but I'll write a column in the newspaper, or I'll certainly respond to a column in the newspaper, as I did with this one. So I want to, I want to thank all of you for joining in the fight. And you guys all fight in different ways, but supporting me is just another way to do your part. So I thank you for that. I also want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming. And I want to thank again CKWE for both the simulcast and the rebroadcast of the show. I also want to thank Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, and Indigenous Resistance Radio. Those are internet networks that carry the show. And I've got to again thank all of you who share the show, especially my wife, who shares this program, the Facebook Live version of this program, on many group pages. But several of you do that. Some of you share the SoundCloud audio that I post up immediately after the show. Some of you share the YouTube videos that we take from recording the show and put it on our YouTube channel, Let's Talk Native TV. I thank all of you for doing that because, look, oftentimes I'm not telling people something they don't know. Well, in the case of some of these folks in Niagara Falls, I'm sure I am. But from a Native perspective, or from a Native standpoint, a lot of times I'm trying to put into words what perhaps some people have a difficult time doing. The thing that I hear most from other Native people is, man, I'm glad you covered that. And I heard what you said, and I brought it up in the next conversation. Look, you don't need to paraphrase me or be afraid to paraphrase me, but what I'm suggesting is that these issues require conversation. And the more of us that know what the deal is, know what the facts are, the more of us who can have an intelligent conversation about this stuff and not just get angry. I mean, we can get angry too, I guess, sometimes, but I think having an intelligent conversation about this and explaining some of this stuff. I mean, some of those poor people in Niagara Falls, they just don't know any better. They honestly think that the Senecas owe them simply because, and this is the view, that we are, because Native people are allowed to do gaming, and the Senecas were allowed to have a casino in Niagara Falls, so they must pay. And that's simply wrong. So part of what we try to do is have that conversation. Now, so let me get back to it a little bit, because one of the things that again, even Tony Farina was suggesting in his column was that the state just didn't do their due diligence, and that there's bad lawyers, or that the Senecas got one over on them. And here's the thing: you have to understand there are three specific time frames that should be talked about. One is before the casino opened the doors, because the state, and they had very skilled lawyers involved. And this wasn't even Cuomo. This was the Pataki administration, the Republican governor. His lawyers negotiated this compact, but even Pataki knew that ultimately the state would do gaming. So for him, and his immediate concern was that there was a lot of money that was leaving New York State and going into Canada. Ontario had casinos open. He wanted the Senecas to open, and he was hoping the first one they would open up would be in Niagara Falls to stop that flow of money, that stop that money from leaving the state. That's what George Pataki's concern was. So the lawyers representing George Pataki's administration negotiated this compact. So those who would say those were just bad lawyers. Okay, so what people are trying to suggest is that the lawyers representing the state in 2002 missed the fact that there was only payments for 14 years. They just simply missed it. I mean, and let's be honest here. It's not just that the payments stopped in 14 years, because it wasn't just about term. It was about rate. In the compact, it clearly says that in year 1 through 4, the Senecas would pay 18% of the slot drop to the net slot drop to the state. In years 5 through 7, it would go up to 22%. In the years 8 through 14, it would be 25%. So anybody who suggests that there's somehow some loose open end, because here's what happened after 14 years. There was a specific time period when this compact, and I don't mean the revenue sharing, I mean the compact, the regulatory stuff, all of the reporting, all of the relationship between the state, not Niagara Falls, Salamanca, and Buffalo in the Seneca Nation, but the state in terms of the regulatory framework spelled out in the compact, that it would be extended for another 7 years, from 2016 to 2023. But for those who suggest that it was just missed, that renewal period didn't include an extension automatically of not only revenue sharing, but also that they would have forgotten to name what the rate would have been. So when this thing would be renewed, if the revenue sharing was intended from the beginning to extend into that 7-year period, they would have mentioned it, for one thing. And they also would have mentioned, well, then what was the percentage? It had already gone from 18 to 22 to 25. Was it going to continue to rise? Or was it going to stop and settle and reach the ceiling at 25%? I mean, contracts, and that's what this compact was, they are not nebulous things. I mean, there's actually a thing called the Four Corners Doctrine. And that's a legal doctrine that says what's in a contract is in a contract. People can't suggest that something was implied or suggested or assumed. If it's not within the four corners, again, if you're looking at a rectangular piece of paper, if it's not within the four corners of the language on that page, then it's not in there. I mean, that's a legal principle. That's not Seneca Nation saying that. That's just basic federal and state law. It's contract law. So it's not in there. Now, keep in mind, in 2009 to 2013, in the middle of the revenue sharing term, there was a conflict between the state and the Seneca Nation. The Seneca stopped paying. They followed the terms of the compact to resolve a dispute. This was the dispute resolution clause of the compact. That's what it lays out in the contract in the state gaming compact. Again, now it's not George Pataki's administration. This is Andrew Cuomo, who has been expanding gaming in the racetracks. Like I said, clearly carving in to the Seneca Nation's market share. So much so that the governor surrendered $200 million to the Senecas for their breach, but then continued on. But again, there were lawyers scrutinizing. They were in arbitration. The arbitration had actually began. They had all the three judges. They were litigating this for all intents and purposes. I say litigate or arbitrating this issue, in accordance to the compact. There is no way that in that time period between 2009 and 2013, that somehow the state's attorneys were oblivious to the fact that it was that it only laid out payment through 2016. Again, a whole different set, a different administration, a different party, and a whole different set of lawyers. So when the Senecas agreed to take the $200 million, but still pay 25%, there was a reason for that. Because, again, when the Senecas negotiated this thing in 2002, they knew that the gaming revenue wasn't lasting forever. This wasn't something that they just discovered by accident and said, oh, look, we don't have to pay anymore. No, this was negotiated with the Pataki administration's lawyers that the revenue sharing was going to be for only 14 years. Now, here's the thing. In 2013, when the Cuomo administration resolved its conflict over the breach of that provision, they knew, and one of the things that one of the reasons the Senecas kind of agreed, to go through and just take $200 million instead of pursuing this thing. They could have pursued this thing all the way through arbitration, and frankly, the money would have stopped altogether then. But what the Senecas, part of the reason the Senecas did go along with the settlement, they wanted to make sure that they get through the renewal period with the governor. Why? Because when the renewal period came, there was no more provision for payment anyway. So rather than drawing a line in the sand right then, and then probably at least creating, hard feelings that the governor would have refused to negotiate a renewal of the compact. Not that would have empowered the state really, but that was part of the reason the Senecas conceded. And how do I know that? I heard counselor after counselor after counselor say, "Well, we settled because we were afraid the state wouldn't renew the compact in 2016." Well, you know what? In 2016, the state renewed the compact. And here was the thing. There were certain dates within that year, 2016, because this provision ended in December of 2016. But there were certain dates, 60 days out, 90 days out, 30, different dates that either the Senecas or the state could raise issues that needed to be readdressed and added or subtracted or whatever else into the renewal. If there was any problem they had or any contention they had with the renewal as it was written, they had deadlines to raise issues. And you know what? The state never raised the issue. So, again, some would have you believe, and some of these folks in Niagara Falls would have you believe that it was another bad set of lawyers. The governor, again, had another bad set of lawyers who somehow just missed this. And I argue that that's not the case. Here's what really happened. After settling that dispute in 2013, the state knew that they had already reduced the value of the exclusivity that they had conceded to the Senecas. It wasn't worth 25% of the slot drop anymore. So they knew if they had to, in order to renew this compact, that they had to tell the Senecas, we need to have language that specifies what is going to be the payment rate through the next 7 years. The Senecas would have said no. The Senecas would have flat out said no, and the line would have been clear. It would have been in the sand. And it would have been clear, because it would have been clear had they finished arbitration in 2013. But the lawyers and the Cuomo administration decided not to raise this issue, and it was a conscious decision. This wasn't an oversight. This was a conscious decision to say, well, we're not going to bring this up. We're going to do what we did last time. Do a media campaign. We're gonna insult the Senecas. We're gonna say that they're bad partners. That they are breaking the agreement. The agreement implies that they would keep paying, because if we raise it before this renewal, it's going to be clear that we knew. So we'll try to wage a PR war against it. And you know what? And proof of this, and proof of somewhat of the success that the Cuomo administration has. Look what the Buffalo News wrote a couple of weeks ago. The Buffalo News literally, I mean, this is the editorial board of the newspaper. They literally suggested in the final line of their editorial about how bad the Senecas were hurting these cities in much the same way that Tony Farina just did. Suggested, but what the Buffalo News suggested is that the Senecas have an ethical obligation to pay, even if they don't have a contractual obligation. This is, if nothing else, if no other obligation, meaning contractual, because that's the only else that's out there, that they have an ethical obligation to pay. So the newspaper, the largest media, print media in Western New York, goes on record just the way Cuomo hoped they would, and says the Senecas have an ethical obligation, even if the language wasn't in the compact that suggested they did. That's exactly what Cuomo was hoping for. And think about the rhetoric that was coming out of Cuomo going forward. Oh, the Senecas, they have a history of breaking agreements. Where is a history of breaking agreements? The state is the one that has the history, and the federal government has the history of breaking agreements with Native people, not the Senecas. So, I mean, and this is where some of this stuff goes beyond not just understanding or a misunderstanding. It starts to get racist. And I know people, oh, there he goes. He's bringing it. Look, I had somebody on one of these group pages say, F the Senecas. If they want to pay, shut off their water. Shut off their power. They want to be a standalone, shut them. You know what? For one thing, that's racist. If you say F the Senecas, and they didn't just say F, they spelled it out. They had all the letters there. If you're going to say that, and there's also this, I know there's this weird kind of macho thing that comes out of these guys where they somehow have this sexual violence associated. Because if you say F somebody, and I mean, they were talking about, oh yeah, we really took it up the butt, up the A, and it's like, where do you guys have all of this sexual violence rage, almost this rape culture that enters in your, I mean, beyond the racist stuff, there's a sexual violence thing that goes on, which I don't know, maybe, that's just the way we talk. I'll tell you, it's kind of creepy. It's kind of creepy, folks. It's kind of creepy. But when you suggest, okay, we're going to block the roads, we're going to tear up the roads, we're going to shut off their power, we're going to let it burn. I mean, they stop just short of saying, we're going to burn the place down. They'll say, no, we're not going to burn the place down, but we'll let it burn. We won't let a fire department. You know what the Seneca Nation here, the Cattaraugus Fire Department here, they go to fires off territory. They fight fires off territory without service contracts. But again, I digress. So all these folks who are suggesting F the Senecas, let's put them out of business. I heard somebody says, yeah, we'll open up a casino here and put them out of business. Well, for one thing, that's not going to happen. And I can explain why that's not going to happen. But for anybody who thinks that you can block their roads, that you can shut off their power or their sewage or their water, or you could refuse to have the Niagara Falls police investigate or arrest or take into custody somebody who's committed a crime there. I mean, these are not Native people. Most these are Niagara Falls residents, many of them. But anyway, what you are suggesting is illegal. It actually is extortion. If you're saying we're going to shut you down if you don't pay, that's extortion. That's a crime. It's a mob crime. It's an organized crime. So for any of you suggesting, and you know what? Deister suggested the same damn thing during that period between 2009 and 2013. He went all over the news saying, well, I'm not going to let my fire department go there if there's a fire. And the people who go there and gamble may want to think twice about staying at a hotel that doesn't have fire protection. In fact, they might be gamblers, but they might not want to risk their lives. He says this even as the tally is ticking along for money that he's going to get. This is the vitriol that came out of Deister and Cuomo at the time, and would pick back. I mean, a couple of months ago, Deister had his city guys out there taking measurements on the openings of the parking lots coming off the road, as if he was going to curb them off, install Jersey barriers. It's illegal, folks. Hey, look, Niagara Falls, I feel your pain. You had a mayor that blew through $250 million, didn't take any of that money and invest it for new revenue. You have a mayor who has refused, in spite of the fact that the Seneca Nation has said multiple times, come meet with us. Let's make sure that you guys aren't incurring any costs associated with our operation. Fire department, police, EMTs, and anything else. So we're paying the water bill and the power bill, so that's a moot point. And you know what? Maybe there are some things that we can still do together. It's not going to be revenue sharing as you knew it. It's not going to be $20 million a year coming into your pockets. Keep in mind, it was almost $90 million that that Niagara Falls got from 2009. 4 years. In 4 years, it was over $20 million a year. It averaged over $20 million a year. And Deister had nothing to show for it. Nothing to show for it. Hey, when Vincenello was the mayor, he put money aside. He actually let the money build up so they could use it hopefully for economic development. There was no economic development money. Yeah, they threw a couple $100,000 at economic and just a bureaucracy. No real economic development. Look, I know that some who listen to the show are wondering, why am I always talking about gaming? And I do talk about it because when it hits the news and then I see some of these comments and when I call out racism and the people say, oh yeah, don't go playing the race card. You just said F the Senecas. If you said F the black man, you don't think that would have been racist? But when you somehow plug the word Seneca in there, that it's somehow okay? I mean, come on. And then you want to threaten a criminal action against them, extortion. You want to extort them for money? I can't say it enough, folks. You cannot squeeze the Seneca Nation for money. If you were going to do something for revenue sharing, then you have to give something up, an ongoing something, and something that has to be equal in value to what you receive. And I have to go back because if we were to look at the situation right now and look at the gaming market, because there is this another part that's debatable. The Seneca Nation is suggesting that their exclusivity, which barely exists at all anyway, continues for the next 7 years, even though the payments don't. And I'm sorry, Seneca Nation, this is where you and I part on this thing. That doesn't even make any sense. Because first off, the only action you have to stop a breach of that exclusivity is to withhold payments. If you're not paying already, then what action do you have? So, I mean, to me, that's a stupid argument. And the reason it's a stupid argument is because the value of the exclusivity as it has been interpreted by the state isn't worth what you've been paying. It wasn't worth 18%, it wasn't worth 22%, it's not, and it sure as hell isn't worth 25%. I mean, if you tried to put a value, and I don't know that you can. I don't know, and again, keep in mind, according to federal policy, the concession from the state for revenue sharing has to be substantial and quantifiable. How do you quantify what the state's exclusivity provision or interpretation of that exclusivity? Because here's what exclusivity is supposed to be. What exclusivity is supposed to be is a situation where the market is protected. The Seneca's gaming market was supposed to be protected by the state from incursion to the extent the state could. I mean, obviously, the state can't stop Pennsylvania or Canada or anybody else, but to the extent that the state could prohibit competition with the Senecas even in just the zone, forget about the whole state. I mean, that's what an exclusivity should have been. But that's not what was created. The state opened up 3 racetracks. I mean, failing racetracks. Racetracks are a dirty business. They've always been a dirty business, especially the harness tracks. They're, it's dirty as far as the treatment of the animals, and they have been failing for years. But the state saw an opportunity. Wow, that's already gaming. If we massage the laws, we can actually say, oh, that's a facility for gaming. We can just expand gaming because we can argue that horse racing is kind of an electronic gaming because, the way, it's posted, and we have OTB, which is really electronic gaming, kind of, really. So we're just going to expand the interpretation about what is legal gaming in New York State, and we'll fill horse tracks up with slot machines. And that's what they did. And it competed direct. If you walk into Hamburg Fairgrounds or racetrack or raceway gaming or whatever they call the place, they used to call it Hamburg Casino. If you walk into the Hamburg Casino, those are slot machines there. They can call them VLTs all they want. Now, that was what they came out of, by the way. And the reason they don't call them slot machines anymore, because after the state surrendered $200 million, they agreed that they would no longer call their racetracks casinos in this area. They'll still call those same racetracks out in Saratoga casinos, but here they'll call them racinos. And they will no longer call their games slot machines. They'll call them electronic gaming. They'll call them VLTs. Look, I hope that those of you who especially from Niagara Falls, who caught the show, and I did post a link to the show on the, Niagara Falls Uncensored, one of the group pages. I'm not insulting any of you folks. I'm not saying that you can't comprehend this. No, I just think that you've been dealt a lot of BS from some very strong advocates. I'm just trying to set the record straight so you understand. I was told that I'm trying to spin a fairy tale about how the state knew this thing was expiring and chose not to do anything. Look, the state wants money to keep flowing. There's no question about that. But the way they tried to go about it was to pretend that the term didn't end in 2016. That's all I got to say. All right, hey, folks, I'm heading to New York. I've got doing an event. I'm showing Man versus Ford at the Brooklyn Commons on Wednesday night at 7:30. I'm going to do my show Thursday morning on WBAI Radio on 99.5. You can catch our stream on WBAI.org. And, of course, I'll do Facebook Live on my show in New York City as well. It's a talkback show. Check it out. Otherwise, we will see you on Friday. Yahweh.
One night I had a casino dream, and there were voices in my head. I could hear a song from far away, and this is what it said. Hey, casino. Hey, casino. Hey, Now this dream continued haunting